Welcome back to the Liberty Perspective. I'm Joe Marshall. Today I want to try and wrap up a 4-part series on windmills and solar, the scam that it represents, the scam that they're pulling over our eyes with this shit, and the threat. More specifically, the threat that the whole renewables, climate change narrative and how it's being woven, how the world socialism of redistributive human rights is being woven into the narrative. It's intrinsic to the narrative of renewables, sustainability. It's the world socialism that's implicit to it, that's inherent to it, that's intrinsic to it, and basically how it's all a threat to our republic and a threat to our liberty. That's Mini P. But it's all a threat to our liberty, and it's all intertwined. And this is basically what I'm trying to get across on a multitude of levels, how the world socialism of human rights, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is basically a derivative of critical theory, of which also critical race theory is a derivative of it, and it's all tied up together with the redistributive justice of human rights, of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, DEI, ESG. It's all the same. It's all the same shit. It's all the same world socialism. It's all the same revolution, that is collectivist revolution that has targeted our republic and our individual rights and liberty as we have known them for destruction. Mini P knows it, right, P? You okay, P? Come on. You want to say hi? She might want to come up and say hi later. But anyways, I want to get to this. So I can get this over. I mean, I don't know how many people are really interested in this anymore. Sometimes I wonder if anybody's interested in it anymore. But if for those of you and for those people that are interested in it, and maybe just as a matter of record, as we go from here for our children's and their grandchildren's generations come in and they're brought up and come to be have influence on policies and politics going forward. What kind of place are we leaving for them? What interpretation of our republic is being left? Are they going to understand what our republic and what our liberty actually is from the perspective of our founders who implemented the original idea of America, what the original idea of America was, a free society? Or are they going to understand our republic, America as founded, their own individual rights and liberty from the perspective of the collectivism that had targeted for destruction, which is what our kids are learning today through critical theory, critical race theory, all same stuff. Liberation theology kind of thing. It's all this postmodern collectivism, revolutionary collectivism. And so this is just for a matter of record, if for nothing else. Even if nobody really even watches these things today, maybe it'll be a matter of record where somebody somewhere sometime can see how they've been taught this new kind of conformism, as Gramsci warned us was going to happen, as some kind of freedom. Get taught this new kind of conformism as freedom going forward. Maybe some of this will, all the work that the Liberty Perspective is here to do with the book that I wrote, Last Call for Liberty. I wrote this thing back and published it in 2015, but I had a decade of work into it before that to leave it for my kids so that they would have a trusted source on where to go and learn how to decipher the collectivism, the great deception of collectivism, from the actual individual rights and liberty of our founding and what our founding principles actually were. But anyways, going forward with that, I want to go back and get to where we left off on the last show, so I can get down through it and get this done get it out there so that you can take it into consideration. I've got other things that I'm working on coming up for the next few shows that take us in kind of an interesting direction, while simultaneously going back to the basics on the implementation of directed economies, directed societies, and kind of where it goes back, and how the players today are talking about things like, evolutionary biology and evolutionary social Darwinism, if you will. They're applying the biological Darwinism to social Darwinism, kind of where these things come from, and how some of these people and players in not just the medical freedom movement, but all of popular politics, populism, the popular politics stuff today, how a lot of these people are talking, they're not making it up as they go along. They're not just coming up with this stuff. They're staying within the guardrails that have been set by them. They're staying within the narrative, the guardrails, if you will, that's been set by them going back hundreds of years. They call it the Enlightenment, but what is the Enlightenment actually? Is it a broadening of our horizons or a corralling of within which limits you're allowed to speak and think? I don't know. We'll be getting into that in our next shows. But just to take from where we left off in the last show here, we left off with this financial post. We kind of went over some things, got into the costs of actual costs going down through there, the cost per kilowatt hour. They've been selling us this line of bullshit that the renewables are cheaper than the fossil fuels. Really? We go in my last show, and I go down through that. We've got prices per kilowatt hour of these things being produced, solar and wind being produced, that range anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 per kilowatt, and then we're getting, also prices coming in here anywhere in 12 cents, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. The range, in which we're being told the price of these things costs is just, it's crazy. It's crazy. But this is kind of where we left off, and I get into an article from the Financial Post, which is more on renewable cost scam. We went into a little bit on how much these jobs that they're promising too, because of course, if they're going to sell these solar panels, these industrial solar panel sites and windmill sites to the farmers in local communities, well, we're going to bring jobs. But at what cost? We've got costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, $250,000 to $500,000, all the way up to millions per job, so-called created by these projects. They're paying on an average of $65,000 a year for these guys that are working in these windmills. The maintenance guys, it's 600 and 700 foot windmills, and they're blowing around. I said, who's going to take that job? It's $65,000 a year. When I retired from a job that was paying more than that a decade ago, and they're still trying to hire, probably paying, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of at least $10,000 or $15,000 more than what they were paying when I retired. They got to be paying $10,000 more than $6. They got to be paying $75,000 a base, between $75,000 and $80,000 base, anyways. And that's on the ground. And they're 5,000 officers short in the prisons in New York State because they can't get anybody to take the job. It's still a state of emergency, to the point that it's still a state of emergency, and the National Guard is still in our prisons. It's still a state of emergency. Which plays into a lot of other things, including that the HALT legislation that came down through criminal justice reform, which is an implementation of the United Nations HALT legislation, which basically says that putting an inmate in isolation, solitary confinement, because he's threatening to kill or hurt or injure staff, officers, or other civilian staff, or even other inmates. You can't put them in jail, which is essentially what, special housing is. It's a jail inside of a jail. The officers show up, they put the guy in jail on the street. Well, officers in the correctional facilities do the same thing. They show up if the guy's going off, if he's threatening the security of the facility, he's threatening or assaulting staff or other inmates, he goes to jail. HALT legislation basically says that putting an inmate in solitary confinement in jail is torture. But the state has been telling these officers, and not only the state, the union's been telling these officers, and not only the union and the state, but the lawyers that are supposedly the negotiators between the state and the union, which wasn't even behind the so-called strike that they keep calling was an illegal strike. You see what I'm saying, where I'm going? The officers were never represented when they went on a walkout. This was a couple months ago during late winter, early spring, when the officers walked out of the correctional facilities here, in which the state declared a state of emergency. Large part due to this HALT legislation that's not allowing the officers to maintain a safe and secure environment, really. Not allowed to have the power to do their job, was threatening their safety beyond reasonable expectation. It's a dangerous job, but you can't, within reasonable expectation. But if policies such as the HALT legislation are implementing, increasing the danger of the job beyond what's reasonable, right, then they can do what they need to do to try to remedy the situation. The state's telling all the officers that they don't have any authority to change that law, that the only thing that they can change is within the law. But during a state of emergency under COVID, the governor seemed to have all the power they wanted to implement legislation, or to enforce certain legislation, or change certain legislation, or to basically implement legislation of their own to override existing legislation during a state of emergency. I don't get it. But, I'm going to be getting into that in some shows coming up in the future, too. So if that seems like it's coming from outer space, I apologize. But it's all wrapped in to the same thing. It's all the same show. It's all the same collectivism that's eating away at our society. But, I don't know. It's kind of a rant, and I apologize for that if you don't get it. But it's all the same show. This Financial Post listing, Bjorn Longbird is where we left off when Minnie P was going apeshit on our last show. Why solar and wind power aren't winning. All-in costs are too high once you count the fossil fuel and battery backups, land requirements, and the damage their equipment does. Kind of got into this a little bit on the last couple shows that I did, where they're shutting down all these fossil fuel shows by fossil fuel producers, these generators, gas, coal, and they're shutting them down to go for this net zero. A lot of them have to be shut down by 2030, 2020, 2032, 2050 or something. They're closing them all down to replace them with this stuff. Well, each time they close one of these things down, you have to, if you're going to go all renewables, sun and solar, then you're going to have to replace them. It's going to take thousands, at least hundreds, if not thousands of windmills, and millions of solar panels over square miles of territory in order to replace one average or typical nuclear power plant or fossil fuel generator, which produces energy all the time, which produces energy 24/7. These windmills and solar panels only are certain sufficiency between 15 and 30%, 15 to 24% for solar panels, and upward of 34% efficient for windmills. That's only when the wind's blowing and not blowing too hard, or when the sun's shining and the days the sun doesn't shine at night, so you got to take that 15% efficiency and you got to cut it in half to 7.5 just for the daytime. Then you get places like New York where we only get 35. Well, this year's kind of an anomaly. We got a lot of sun this year, but most of the time I would say we're 35% sunshine here. I would say it's cloudy at least 60+% of the time here, if you take the average into consideration. Seattle's probably one of the only places in the country that are worse than central New York as far as cloud coverage. But so the story goes. But this article, it goes over kind of what we touched on before. Like I said, these battery backups, the batteries, holy shit, because they're intermittent. These things are incompatible with our grid, right? That we've had because they're intermittent. You need all kinds of battery storage because if you're going to run, we're going to get into this in a minute, but take into consideration as we get into how much battery storage, if they're not going to back it up with fossil fuels or nuclear, which they were now New York State's taking on the policy of nuclear. They're going to mandate a nuclear policy, which I will put out there again, makes all these wind and solars irrelevant. It makes them, obsolete because they're not going to be able to produce the power that they need for all these data centers coming up with this all AI as we go towards a centralized society, not just a centralized economy, but a centralized society as a whole. They're going to need all kinds of data on everybody, on everything. Go to individualized medicine. They're going to need all kinds of data. If they're going to have order, enforce order and compliance to the general will or the will of the planners, they're going to need all kinds of data to do it. Where to fit the what person to the right job according to the needs of the collective and all that kind of stuff. It gets exponentially more confining and more restrictive the more you think about what they're going to need to do to centralize our society. These wind and solar panels, this whole renewable project, the sustainability, the diversity, DEI, ESG that's all rolled into these windmills and solar panels is all the same shit. It's all the same shit. In this article, it says we're all constantly being told that solar and wind are now the cheapest forms of electricity, yet governments around the world felt that they had to spend $1.8 trillion on green transition last year. It's on the governments of the world. In 2022, one peer-reviewed study showed an increase of 11 to 42 times, making solar by far the most expensive electricity source. Now, this is a study. You're saying the most expensive solar makes solar the most expensive source, but we've seen other things that show that wind is the most expensive, especially offshore wind. Again, conflicting information coming out of the proponents and advocates of this shit. Okay? We need electricity whether or not the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. But our battery capacity is woefully inadequate. A new study shows that to achieve 100% solar or wind electricity with sufficient backup, the U.S. would need to be able to store almost 3 months' worth of electricity every year. It currently has 7 minutes. Noodle that one for a minute. Seven minutes. We got to go from 7 minutes worth of battery storage to 3 months worth of battery storage if there's zero emissions, if they're get rid of fossil fuel, if they're 100% renewables is going to come to fruition, right? Kind of exposes the whole agenda as bullshit right there. I mean, really, but so you got that. And this is the study that they're talking about on that. Okay, storage requirements to mitigate intermittent renewable energy sources analysis for the U.S. Northeast that came out of that. And what does it say? Yes, and that came out in September of 2023. Way back in September 2023, right? It says the required batteries would cost the U.S. 5 times its current GDP. 5 times our current GDP to implement those batteries, to make that happen. 5 times our current GDP. And that's not all. And it would have to replace them all when they expired after 15 years. So it's going to cost us 5 times our current national GDP to put these batteries in and maintain these batteries every 15 years. Every 15 years. They're spending us into oblivion. And that was another title of one of the other shows that I did. And it's by design. They're not doing it by mistake. You can't be that stupid by mistake. You can't propose something that devastating that would indebt your country that much. You can't do it by mistake. You know? Globally, the cost would have sufficient batteries to run sufficient batteries on a global scale would run to 10 times the global GDP with a new bill every 15 years. Okay, if solar and wind really were cheaper, they would replace. You got to wonder. This has got to be coming from. This is coming from. The NIMBYs. This is coming from the deniers. This is coming from the. This is false information. This is misinformation coming from people who the people in flyover country who just don't get it. All right. If solar and wind really were cheaper, they would replace fossil fuels without the need for a grand push from politicians and the renewables industry. The claim that they are cheap is repeated incessantly, not because it's true, but because it's convenient. Right. If we want to fix climate change... Wait a minute. What? If we want to fix climate change, we must instead invest much more in research and development into low CO2 energy. If we want to fix climate change, we got to do something different. Yeah. We must instead invest much more. We must instead invest much more in research and development into low CO2 energy. You see the twist? You see the twist in this information? This isn't coming from the NIMBYs. This isn't coming from the deniers. This is coming from the Kool-Aid swizzlers themselves. This is coming from the people drunk on the narrative coming out of all the people that are the public-private partnership enterprise that is the renewable green scam, that is the green world new Green Deal or whatever they're calling it, the green economy. It's a public-private partnership on a global scale industry narrative being pushed out of the World Economic Forum. All this Green New Deal shit that's coming out, it's being pushed out by the World Economic Forum, and all the people that own the banks, that own these companies, that also own the banks, that own the governments of the world. Right? All those people on the left, all those communists, socialists, democratic socialists, whatever you want to call yourself, from the political collectivist left, and not to mention the ones on the progressive collectivist right that are pushing for the same shit too, right? Centralized economies and whatnot, right? Here it is. We can't fix climate change. We must instead invest much, much more in research and development into low CO2 energy. They're not denying it. These are advocates. It's from freaking advocates. This is information from advocates of this stuff. They just want the money. So as you can see, this is not from any denier. It's from the Kool-Aid Swizzlers themselves who want money for R&D. These are the people. Now you've got all these public-private partnership people, all the people that are in the money. They're fighting each other, and they're trying to push out narratives that will justify them getting a larger share of the public-private partnership government-funded pie at the expense of the governments in the countries that those governments represent. The debt is so colossal that, you know, the taxpayer has basically been removed from the equation of who gives a shit about the taxpayer anymore, because the taxpayer has been made irrelevant in this narrative. We owe so much money and they're spending so much money. This is another thing. People, I don't know if people get or not, or if people have seen, but I haven't heard anybody talk about it besides me. You push it out there that the taxpayer's been made irrelevant. When you show up at a school board meeting, when you show up at any of these at a town board where they want to put a bunch of frickin' solar panels in or a bunch of frickin' windmills in, if you're even allowed to have local, even if local opposition matters anymore, in New York State it's been made illegal. Just step right on them. It doesn't frickin' matter. They step right on the republic. Local opposition is done here in New York State. Hopefully you can do something about it in other states. You know, the Constitution was Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution guarantees us a Republican form of government, yet all these policies pushing all these freaking renewables and shit they're through statutes pulling the rug out from underneath local opposition here, stepping on our republic, eroding our republic, compromising our republic. You know, that's one thing that they could do too. This all gets rolled into the same narrative here. These people want more money for their aspect of how they're putting us into more and more and more debt. You know, you show up at one of these meetings, at any of these things, and you tell them, well, I'm a taxpayer, and it matters whether, you know, I have a right. I'm a taxpayer. And they're going to say, so what, dude? So we don't give a shit about the taxpayers, because there's no way the taxpayers, this generation or the next, or for any generation, number of generations into the foreseeable future, are going to be able to pay this debt back. So all they're doing is every time they spend money, they're spending money on all these freaking jobs in here into the trillions. Into the trillions. They're spending us into oblivion, and they don't care. Even though the taxpayer is made irrelevant, and the concept of the taxpayer having any say-so in what goes on around here, we've been made irrelevant. We're so deep in debt. But what it doesn't negate or take away from the fact that every dollar we go in debt makes us that much more extortable. We're not going to be able to get out of it, because they're going to extort us into whatever they want. And we can see that coming into play in all kinds of politics today. You know, they blame it on capitalism, but it's the fascism of public-private partnerships and centralized economy, and technocrats that are designing it. The knowledgeable experts, the science of centralized economy. You know, right? But anyways, I just want to show you that there. Not only this information isn't coming from dissenters, it's coming from the advocates of these things themselves, who smell the blood in the water, the green blood, which is the money, our green blood, putting us more and more into debt, and all these sharks that smell that green blood, that are coming to fight for it, for every drop of it. That's what it is. Well, buying off local politicians. Now, if I was to tell you that we know that all the money that are coming in, they got local opposition squashed in New York State, but all through this doctrine of renewable doctrine, they're saying that they don't have, one of the biggest fears or biggest oppositions to it, they fear, is local opposition. NIMBYs, not in my backyard people, they call us, you know. but so if I was to tell you that we've always known that palms are getting greased and politicians are getting bought up, but what if I was to tell you? What if I was to tell you that it's now an official policy? It's been made statutorily official in New York State to roll in the buying off of local politicians, regardless of the fact that local opposition has been statutorily oppressed. I ain't shitting you. I can't make this shit up. Well, there's this article here from Environmental Law Reporter, okay? This article. How to blow up a solar farm, local opposition to renewable energy projects. Okay. Abstract. A white paper. Local opposition to siting of wind and solar energy projects stands to threaten the renewable energy transition in New York State. This is specifically regarding New York State. The state government has sought to quell this opposition by statutorily requiring developers to provide community benefits as a condition to their permits. Now, the squashing of local opposition by New York State actually happened like back in 2022. This is put out in 2024. Written was 2024. It wasn't even published until May 2025, I guess. A couple years after, regardless of how long after, this was published after that New York State statutorily suppressed local opposition to these windmills. They said, I can't allow them. They're just during the way of my green agenda, and I'm just, fuck them. You know? That's Hochul, our governor. And the legislator as well, I suppose, right? The whole freaking government's gone. New York State government is an active agent of the revolution that has targeted our republic for destruction. The revolutionary collectivism, they are an agent of the revolutionary collectivism that has targeted our republic and our individual rights and liberty for destruction, and the evidence of it can be found through on any state website. It's there. It's infused with the doctrine and tenets of the collectivism that has targeted our republic and liberty for destruction, without a doubt. In this article, abstract, local opposition, threatens to stands to threaten the renewable energy transition in New York. The state government has sought to quell this opposition by statutorily requiring developers to provide community benefits as a condition of their permits, so they're making it an official policy to pay off local politicians. Despite the fact that in New York State they don't have any power to oppose it anyway. What was that, Pete? Anyways, so what that tells me is that if they don't have the power local opposition has no power, no teeth in the law, is not recognized in the law, then some lawyer somewhere must have seen a loophole that said, geez, you know what? We better, suppress any attempt from somebody somewhere. They must have found a loophole that if they push it, they could probably find that law suppressing local opposition is unconstitutional somehow. So well, let's buy them off before they oppose us. Well, as long as check, yeah. One way these benefits are secured is through host of community agreements. They got a nice little acronym for that. With the developer typically agreeing to make payments to the municipality, punk dues payments, to the municipality from project revenue in exchange for the municipality promising not to oppose the project during the state permitting process. Even though they don't have any power, this has become official policy to pay off local politicians. They give them money for roads, they can ask for money for whatever they want, and then the state's going to mandate, they put it right in the contract, these companies are going to bid these projects, that they're going to have to take the money and give, these local governments, town governments, village, municipalities, little tiny cities around here. I mean, you can stand where they want to put these windmills from the Agricola Wind Project here, Liberty Renewables, which is just the front of the global conglomerate Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, I think is their name, out of Denmark. But you can stand in where they want to put these. You might not be able to see 10 houses as far as you can see in any direction. You know, so how many people could possibly oppose this shit? You know. But they go to these local communities here, and they just say, "Listen, man, as long as you don't push back, we're going to put it these host community agreements." They have an acronym for HCA, with the developer typically agreeing to make payments to the municipality from the project revenue in exchange for the municipality promising not to oppose the project during the state permitting process. Whoa. It's official. They're paying off local politicians. I tell you, it doesn't take much money for the stupid to shine through real quick, all the way to the top with local politicians when it comes to money. And it doesn't even have to be money. You know, I don't know. But there it is. Progressive cannibalism of our republic. We don't have to, it isn't just other people in these foreign global entities and global foreign philosophies and collectivisms and doctrine that stand a threat to our country. Our own governments, our own politicians, our own representatives have not only advocated the same philosophies and doctrines, they've become spear point vanguard agents of the revolution. Such fascistic, technocratic, progressive policies in the public-private partnerships are, at least by Mussolini's definition and work that he implemented as fascism, right? The technocratic progressive policies are and have been eating away at our liberty and republic twofold, while simultaneously implementing the world socialism of the likes of Agenda 21, 2030, 2050, and net zero of redistributive human rights-based United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Equator Principles, One Health, DEI, and ESG of the centralized global governance. They all codify global governance, and they're all based on the redistributive global governance of human rights, which redefines national sovereignty, by the way. I did a show on that too. They are, in short, doing the dirty work of the collectivism, both nationalist and internationalist, by the way, that has targeted our individualism, our liberty, limited constitution, republic, and in the end, even the patriarchy of God himself for destruction. Yeah, we're going to be getting into some more of that, actual patriotism, paternalism of God himself. Yeah, on the significance of religions for sustainable development goals. Yeah. There's some crazy stuff. I've done some shows too on how sustainable development has been being used to undermine religion, the world religions, not just Christianity, Judeo-Christian religions specifically, but all religions. It's just a part of collectivism. You can't define collectivism without taking into consideration its religious or spiritual aspect, which in reality is its anti-religion, anti-spiritual aspect, going back hundreds of years in collectivist doctrine, secular doctrine. And it's not just atheist, it's anti-theist. And we're going to get into that in our next couple shows, but it's all tied in. It's all the same stuff. These UN Sustainable Development Goals, The world redistributive justice of world socialism, right there, all based on the world socialism of redistributive human rights, the Equator Principles. We can get into the Equator Principles and human rights due diligence, all tied to human rights again, right there, right? One Health. Climate change in One Health. We're into the climate change here. We're into One Health. It's all the same stuff. This is a white paper. You can't, One Health gets rolled out of the whole climate change narrative too. And One Health is literally the codification of the tenets of the world socialist revolution that has targeted our republic and individual rights and liberty for destruction. It takes the tenets of that revolution against us and against a free society anywhere on earth. It takes the tenets of that collectivist revolution and codifies them into overarching global governance health laws. That's what One Health does. And it all ties in together. And the other thing is that I wanted to show you really quick while I'm here is that this ties into the local. I've done a show that touches on this. That I went over all this on another show I did about windmills and solar panels, and I'll leave the links to all the ones in the show notes on this show so that you can have them all that I did in one place on solar and wind. But those whole things, this whole Copenhagen, this Liberty Renewables, it's owned by Copenhagen. They try to tell us that, it's a local company at 12 people. It's a local company that's going to do all this shit. No, the Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners is its parent company, and that are tied in with the World Economic Forum. And here's Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners as part of a World Economic Forum partnership. Just went over this in some other shows, but it ties into, we see what, this is the Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, our ESG commitment. Our approach to sustainability is founded on a strong link between ESG standards and value creation. I'm trying to tell you that, that it's going to be profitable for you to push world socialism and be in with the public-private partnership, group. So CIP is a fund management company and a formal signatory to the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, which is at PRI, and the United Nations Global Impact. Our approach to sustainability is founded on a strong, consistent link between high environmental, social, and governance, ESG, standards and the value creation and protection. Sustainability. That word sustainability, every time you hear that word sustainability, if you just replace it with world socialism, you will understand exactly what they're saying. Because that's all it is. It's just another name for the world socialism, for world socialism. And for the revolution against anything individual, against individualism, against our republic, against our individual rights and liberty, against a free society. There was a guy... you talk about Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, 2050. Agenda 21, not too long ago, not too many years ago, everybody was telling you it was a conspiracy theory. Anybody who brought up the United Nations Agenda for the 21st century, otherwise known as Agenda 21, well, you're just a freaking whacked out conspiracy theorist. There was a guy by the name of Henry Lamb who was warning us about this and its threat to our private property rights. Sustainability was a concept by world socialists Gro Harlem Brundtland and Maurice Strong that they put together in the Brundtland Report, which came out in 1987. The definition of sustainability or sustainable development in that document was accepted by President Clinton in 1992 or 3, I can't remember. In the early 90s, it was accepted by President Clinton's sustainable development as the definition of sustainable for the United States accepted the Brundtland Report's definition of what sustainable development was. It's in my book. I go over it in my book. It's in chapter 2. The whole chapter 2 in my book, Last Call for Liberty, I go over the whole thing on how this whole sustainable development thing came to be and what it means and where it comes from from other United Nations doctrines, which are all based on the same world socialism. Secular world socialism. Humanist, scientific humanist world socialism. Evolutionary, scientific world socialism. It all comes together, But anyways, just kind of wanted to go over that. Wanted to point this to you that this company, all these companies, when you get these companies coming in here, what you're bringing in here is you're bringing all this human rights, this principles for responsibility that they're signed on to as a signer of. They are how they put it. We are formal signatories of this shit, right? Human rights, diversity, equity, inclusion, key action areas for investors. I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do they actually mean? And where's the definition come from? It comes from world socialist doctrine. I mean, that's where it comes from. Redistributive justice and everything else. But I go over it and I show this to you. They're also signed on to the United Nations Global Compact, which is just, they say right in there that they take strategic actions to advance broader societal goals such as the United Nations Development Goals, which are all redistributive justice, which is the implementation of socialism, and redistributive human rights, the global governance, right? So it's all the same stuff. That's what I'm just trying to show you. It all rolls in, and I go over this into a little bit more detail in them other shows. So I got like 6 shows together, including this one. It's going to be 6 because there's 4 in this series, and there's 2 other ones. In December of 2024, New York State Governor Hochul signed the Climate Change Superfund Act. And this is where I'm getting at as far as the cannibalism that is being set up from within our own government on this, within our own country on this. We're cannibalizing each other. Hochul, New York State government, signed a Climate Exchange Superfund Act, which is this. It's a real frickin' thing. And they're bragging about it. New York State, it says New York State Senate here. Governor signs Climate Exchange Superfund Act as if it was something to be proud of, into law that will try and hold big oil companies across America legally responsible for $75 billion of the alleged hundreds of billions of dollars in damages supposedly caused by global warming. Going all the way back to the year 2000. This has resulted in not only the Trump administration suing Hochul in New York State, but a joint lawsuit of 22 states filing a lawsuit against New York State. What? And this is all implementation of the world socialism. You've got New York State acting on behalf of the agenda of the doctrine, the world socialist doctrine that has targeted the United States Republic of the United States. Our republic has targeted our republic, our limited constitution, our individual rights and liberty for destruction. And Hochul and New York State government and any other government agency that has signed on to this DEI ESG shit, and that's what it is. It's the implementation of the redistributive world socialism, redistributive justice of the global governance of human rights. It's been brought about by the conversation or critical awareness and critical consciousness of critical theory, which at its most basic level is an implementation or a instigation of civil war in the United States, a perpetual civil war within the United States between people of political thought and theory, by race, They're going to divide us on every level, on multiples of level. And civil wars don't have to be fought just on a battlefield with guns. They can be fought in the courts. Once the courts become infused with the same tenets of the same world socialism, which is, I've done shows on that it's actually happening in our courts, where our judges and our juries are being trained in the critical theory, the tenets of world socialism, world socialist revolution, the critical theory of world socialist revolution, which is all things critical of the society targeted for destruction. It's not the critical thinking we used to know. It's all things critical, and only all things critical of the society targeted for destruction. That's what critical theory is. Critical race theory is just all things critical of the society targeted for destruction based on race. It's all it is. It's what it is. And it's being introduced, the critical pedagogy of Paulo Freire, otherwise known as the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is all the oppressor versus oppressed context of the Communist Manifesto implemented in critical curricula, implemented in critical pedagogy, that's being infused into mandatory curricula via DEI and ESG. It's all the same. You know what I mean? But they'll deny that critical theory or critical race theory is being taught, but they will be openly bragging about the DEI ESG derivative or result of that critical theory. But once you know what they are, the light it becomes a little clearer on the great deception that they're pulling over the people. And our kids don't know anything about their own country. They don't know anything about their own liberty that are being taught this shit, other than from the perspective of the revolution that's targeted our republic, our constitution, and the liberty of these kids themselves for destruction. The individual rights and liberty of these kids for destruction. They want to replace them with the collectivism, the liberty of collectivism of human rights, which is as per the central planners. It's a little different. But all they got to do, all these revolutionaries around the world got to do is kick back and light up a big cigar and watch, kick their feet up, just kick back and watch New York State. Governor Holt will do the work for them in the revolution by taking down as much of America as possible to implement the policies, renewable policies, that are spending us into oblivion. Right? And that's what is the green blood. The green blood, the money, that's how they're bleeding us to death. Death by all these millions of cuts, billions and trillions of cuts, if you want to count it in dollars. In debt dollars. Trump administration sues New York and Vermont over climate superfund. It's this article here. Yeah, I guess Vermont did sort of the same shit. I don't know. Live or die state, live free or die state. Yeah, now implementing the world socialism of DEI, ESG, doing the same shit the New York State's doing. All right. 22 states sue New York, alleging environmental fund is unconstitutional. This is just this year, just this year. 22 states alleging environmental environmental bond, environmental fund, whatever, is unconstitutional. They don't care. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. Harvard Law is looking to force a wider compliance culture. Okay, now that we're getting into this, okay, these big polluters, these big CO2 polluters, doesn't even have to be pollution. They're calling carbon dioxide pollution. I did a whole show on that scam too. We're carbon-based life forms for one, right? We exhale CO2 that plants need to make the oxygen that most every living creature on Earth needs to breathe and stay alive. And there are creatures that don't live on oxygen, right? It's kind of cool. The volcanic, thrusts volcanic vents that they have at the bottom of the ocean and stuff, where all them creatures that live around them, they get their energy. It's kind of cool how life works, But maybe someday a number of states will get together and pass a multitude of Superfund acts of their own against progressive states like New York that have spent themselves and our country into oblivion. Superfund acts that will hold such progressive states legally responsible for the monetary losses and damages caused by the exponential expanding inflation in perpetuity now being forced upon every American in every dollar in their pockets and in their paychecks. That's been caused as a direct result of their endless depraved rate of spending in public funds. Every dollar that they spend affects the value, decreases the value of every dollar in your paycheck, and if you have any left after you pay all your bills, what's left in your pocket or your wallet. And Harvard, not just in renewable, but in carbon majors, which are all these companies that are supposedly spilling all this, pollution that's CO2, forcing climate change compliance. I also get into that a little bit on these other shows, too, that they're doing that. I'll show you. They're doing that. Let me see if I just get up here for a second. They're doing it through AI. They're doing it through AI. Forcing compliance to DEI, ESG through yeah. Here it is. That ESG. I covered this on that other show, another show that I did, a couple months ago, but they're enforcing it through AI. The ESG stuff. Palantir, isn't that Trump's buddy? Diversity, equity, inclusion. Peter Thiel. DEI at Palantir Technologies. What do employees from different demographic backgrounds think about diversity, equity, inclusion at Palantir Technologies? Read what Palantir Technologies is doing to promote DEI in the workplace and how the company supports individuals of varying gender, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, religion, and other attributes. This is Palantir coming from, I'm making this shit up, okay? And also, the central banks are using this AI to force compliance, through loans of DEI, ESG, redistributive world socialism, and making everybody bend the knee and kiss the ring to DEI, ESG in order to even get loans from the bank to conduct your business, right? Using artificial intelligence to collect data for assessing climate-related financial risks. Then you've got empowering equity, enhancing supply chain visibility with AI-driven DEI solutions. I'm telling you, they're policing the DEI ESG requirements. New York State does it through NYSERDA. You don't even get a contract. You don't even get a contract to do any of this public work unless you bend the knee and kiss the ring. DEI, ESG, and human rights, and redistributive global governance of human rights and sustainable development goals. You don't get the contract. It's not just for your company. You have to push that compliance through your whole supply chain, which basically infuses this whole world socialism of DEI, ESG, and human rights into our economy. That pushes it, what they call pushing it upstream into our economy. One Health did the same thing by codifying the tenets of that same shit into overarching global governance health laws, DEI, ESG is doing the same thing to our economy by these mandates. That's what they're doing. And I just wanted to show you that. Now, they want forcing climate change compliance. They're doing it with AI. They're doing it. The World Banks are doing it. They want more banks and companies, in order to even get a loan to the bank, you have to, well, where's your DEI, ESG compliance? Yeah, the Supreme Court ruled that, what was it, affirmative action was unconstitutional, but this is just another aspect of the same world socialism. Affirmative action was just another aspect of the same world socialism, you know. But yeah, so yeah, not just renewable, but in carbon majors like the ones being sued by New York State's Kathy Hochul in the above lawsuit via embedded compliance officers, monitors with plenary power. That's what Harvard wants to do. They want to give plenary power to people monitoring compliance officers to DEI, ESG, and carbon emissions, whatever they want. Harvard's pushing for even more. Yeah. Doesn't surprise me, though. You know? I mean, Harvard's just another, the whole of academia isn't anything other than just another vanguard aspect of the same world socialism that's targeted our republic and our individual rights and liberty for destruction by the doctrines they push. You know, revolutionary collectivists the world over don't have to do shit but kick back and watch while the progressive comrades like Hochul, Governor Hochul of New York State, undo America as founded, our Constitution, liberty, and republic for them. One cannibalistic progressive progress at a time. One cannibalistic progressive progress at a time. And it's all coming down through renewables. It's coming down through solar and wind sustainability. An example of allegedly pro-individual. Oh, here's another. Remember during COVID, they implemented with military grade psychological manipulation tactics against the public for maximum vaccine uptake. It was an official policy. The CDC, FDA, and CDC put out step-by-step instructions to the doctors, or they don't call them doctors anymore. They're providers. Healthcare providers. Okay. They put out step-by-step instructions on how to utilize and how to leverage our trust in our doctors for maximum vaccine uptake as their first priority. Their priority was no longer our health or the patient-doctor relationship. It was maximize maximum vaccine uptake. So that was their first priority. Step-by-step instructions in what they referred to as motivational interviewing skills. I did videos on this too. Psychological, what they applied psychology, military-grade applied psychology tactics. Motivational interviewing skills being just one of them. Nudge was another one. That's Cass Sunstein's. He's the guy who wrote the book on that, right? Cass Sunstein. Nudge. But they have other ones too. They utilize different things. They utilize social contract theory to make you feel guilty about your social responsibility to take a vaccine. Well, you can't see your kids or your grandkids till you get a shot. You know, the kids can't see their grandparents, their old and frail grandparents, until they get a shot. You don't have a right to not take the vaccine because you're jeopardizing my health. So that's where this whole social contract theory shit comes in, implementing the global governance human rights aspect of the responsibility of that world socialist human rights, responsibility of government to protect the health the public health, to protect the public health of the collective from the rogue actions of individuals who don't comply to the general will. The difference. You can have an individual right to not take the vaccine, but you can't have an individual human right to not take the vaccine, because the human rights allow for the government to step on your rights under what they refer to as something principles. I can't think of it right now. Can't think of it. But the human right, and I did shows on this anyways, Syracuse principles. Something called the Syracuse principles that allow for government to step on the rights of the individual for the benefit of the collective. I shit you not. So it all depends on how you understand these things. If you understand human rights and our individual rights and liberty are the same thing, you've at once automatically lost all your individual rights and liberty. You've surrendered them just by accepting that human rights have taken their place. But anyways, an example of an alleged pro-individual liberty applied psychology messaging using your own assumed core, or they use your own biases against you. They'll go to the conservative community and they'll say, well, how are we going to get the conservatives? These people are usually like, F the government, we ain't listening to them, we don't trust them, But what they'll do is they'll go and say, hey, you know what? We're going to use the momentum of that, your conservative biases against you. And this is how they're going to do it. And they're doing the same shit with solar and wind as they did with COVID. An example of the alleged pro-individual liberty applied psychology messaging using your own assumed core conservative beliefs, values, and biases against not only you but the whole of our republic and all that the actual individual rights and liberty of us all. They're implementing your love of these things to get you to actually sign on to the agenda that's attacked them that's targeted them for destruction by making you think you're actually supporting them. This is crazy shit. Sorry. This shit gives me gas. I could probably power a windmill from the gas this shit gives me. But anyways, so example. Harvard Law Review, renewable energy credits as property. What they're going to do is, I did a whole show on the scam of what renewable energy credits are. They're a bullshit scam. They don't exist till the government made them exist. They're like a cap and trade system. Carbon credits are the same kind of shit. Forced redistributive justice. Milk credits. They've done the same thing to the farmers around here. They put a limit that they call a quota. They put a limit on how much milk the farmers can make. They call it a quota. So if a farmer wants to make more milk than he produced, say, in the year 2023 or 2019 or whatever, we'll just say that, okay? Then he has to find a farmer that produced milk, another farmer that produced milk in 2019 that isn't going to be making, who's going to use under his quota, under his allowed poundage of milk. And he has to buy those credits from that farmer. So we had farmers around here that actually freaking got out of business. They sold all their cows, they got out of business, and they just sold their milk credits. They made money. Some of these dairy cows are worth thousands each, and these guys have hundreds, if not thousands of them. And then they can rent the land out, for rental or whatever. A lot of these guys too, now they're getting paid more money to put solar panels and windmills per acre than they could possibly make by renting out their land for tillage. It's crazy. It's undermining everything on a multitude of levels. But these milk credits are the same as carbon credits. The same thing. It's a forced redistribution of wealth. If you're a baker and you're only allowed so many units of gas or electricity to use in your ovens, but you want to grow and the carbon credits on your business, you can only use so many energy, so much energy based on what your past energy use was, and whatever year they declared this is your quota. You got to find another company that's not going to be using it, or that's going out of business, so that you can buy their credits, their carbon credits, to grow your business. It's a forced redistribution of wealth on a multitude of levels. Same with these frickin' carbon credits. It's the same shit. The same with these what they call these renewable RECs, or renewable energy credits. It's the same shit. A company, as I went over in my other shows, a company can use 100% coal energy, 100% fossil fuel energy. If they use, I don't know, we'll just say they use however many kilowatts of power, they buy the equal amount of kilowatts per power from a renewable energy credit source, which is a windmill or a solar panel thing, right? Then they can go to the government and pay their punk dues because they're being mandated to be compliant. But they can't actually be compliant because they're running on 100% freaking coal electricity to run their business. But they can buy the credits from a windmill or solar panel generator, and then say to the government, they show them the certificate that they paid for the equal amount of what they used, and the government accepts that, so that now they can say that they're 100% renewable and that they're carbon free, and they meet the compliance mandate. It's all bullshit. They're still using 100% freaking coal. It's a bullshit scam. Punk dues. They force these companies to pay the punk dues. Companies are all in it because they're tied into the public-private partnership, and they are exempt from market forces. That's what a public-private partnership is. The fascism of public-private partnerships, or corporatism, isn't capitalism. It isn't free market capitalism. It isn't free enterprise. It's a closed system where the government takes all these companies under their wing. Well, we don't really know how that works anymore, because these companies, the governments, are getting their money that they're in debt to the people that own these companies, also own the banks of the world that own the governments of the world because of their debt. So which way is it really going? Which way is it going? Either way, the circle is tight. It's a tight and closed circle, and we're on the outside. You know? But yeah, so these new renewable energy credits is property. They're going to describe them to you as private property, or they're going to fight the system. Either way, they're being presented as private property. And this comes out of Harvard too. Let me see. Renewable energy credits as property. This note draws on the property theory. It draws on the property theory, because collectivism doesn't accept property or private property, so they have to say that it's collectivism versus individualism. You got, what is private property? It comes from individualism, but so we're going to say it's a theory. How that categorization fits RECs in an effort to explain the often assumed conclusion that RECs are property. Often assumed. Well, it would be property created out of thin air by the state if it is property. It's not actual property. It's not a fruit of your labor. It's not a fruit of your labor. It's a fruit of the state. That some people are being forced to buy in order to be in compliance with a mandate. Punk dues. But anyways, the categorization is not simply academic. Effective REC policy empowers states and private actors to better pursue decarbonization of their electricity use, which is essential for limiting the worst effects of climate crisis. Again, Harvard drinking the freaking Kool-Aid, all of academia. They're nothing but going to be suckholes on this whole freaking agenda, because they're all they have to be suckholes because they got their hand out for the same government money. They're all on the government too, right? It is what it is. You got this from the Clean Grid, Renewables and Property Rights. One of the things that I'm telling you right now, as I talked about Henry Lamb earlier, is the whole concept of sustainable development that comes down through that these renewables are being pushed under, solar and wind are being pushed under sustainable development, sustainable, whatever. As it comes out of the Brundtland Report, United Nations, they're going to try and get people who are pushing against it. You got a world socialism that has targeted private property rights for destruction. Now wanting to get local dummies, people like me, to say, well, you want to protect your property rights, man? Don't worry that we've targeted them for destruction. Hopefully you don't know about that. But you want to protect your property rights, man? Jump on the bandwagon with us. So we'll help you protect your property rights. I shit you not. Renewables and property rights, and they got the farmer out here checking his crop, walking around his crop as the solar panels. Some propaganda for you right there, propaganda 101. As more and more clean energy development has occurred, questions about land use, particularly around solar, are driving a debate around property rights. What are property rights? In the Midwest, listen to this. In the Midwest, it is common for property owners to have the right to farm in agricultural districts. Yeah, within the past couple of years, I've been seeing right to farm signs going up around here. The first ones were down in Tompkins County, around Ithaca, New York, which is where Cornell University is, and Ithaca College. Boy, you know, locally people say it's a bunch of communists surrounded by a bunch of rednecks. that's what Ithaca is. But at the same time, this is what you have. You know, they got these signs. They got a farmer on a tractor says right to farm area. Oh, what the hell? I mean, we've always had the right to farm. Why all of a sudden the right to farm? Because it was a natural right. We didn't have to be told it was a right to farm. Why would anybody have a right to farm unless it was a human right? All of a sudden was a human right to farm. I don't know. But a lot of progressive policies are pushing this right to farm shit. But anyways, under this right to farm in agricultural districts, however, unless a local area is unzoned, property owners are often subject to local decision makers approving their right to host wind turbines or solar arrays. No, yeah, local people here. You want your property rights guy. Our whole property rights of America, as Noah Webster told us, one of our founding fathers. I mean, most countries in the world, they went to the stream of liberty, which was maybe the freedom of the press or free speech or freedom of religion, right? But what the United States did in his speech in defense of the Constitution, okay, Noah Webster talked about property rights being the fountain from which the stream of liberty flows, and therefore what we needed to protect most in order to preserve our freedom and liberty. Property rights. And the one thing that all this world socialism does, first and foremost, is undermine the concept at every level of private property rights. And as Henry Lamb tried to warn everybody years ago when they told him he was a conspiracy theorist. You know, for generations, Iowans have made their livestock, their livelihoods off of farming the state's rich soil, which was made possible by ensuring that landowners had the right to choose how they wanted to farm their land. A collectivist understanding of what our individual rights and liberty are, whether they're telling you outright they're going to destroy them, or they're trying to get you to protect them by implementing the socialism that's targeted them for destruction. Do you see what I'm saying? This is this is a mind fuck. Excuse my language. There's no other word that I can come up with to describe this nearly as aptly. It's what it is. Unless local areas is unzoned, property owners are often subject to local decision makers approving their right to host wind turbines or solar arrays. For generations, Iowans have made their livelihoods off farming the rich soil, which was made possible by ensuring that landowners had the right to choose how they wanted to farm their land. According to Jim, this guy, a landowner near an Energy Partners future Maple Grove Solar and Storage Project in Barron County, Wisconsin, members of rural communities accepted that property rights meant that landowners could do whatever they wanted with their land, so long as it did not interfere with their neighbors. That goes back. Our liberty is as long as it doesn't infringe on the liberty of others, kind of thing, right? They're saying that the local restrictions on property rights by zoning boards, you got zoning boards, they put restrictions on your property rights unconstitutionally, in my observation, in a lot of cases, but they do it anyways. But they're implementing progressive policies that will do that. They're implementing progressive concepts, progressive mindset, and restricting our property rights for whatever reason, but here they're going to say that those progressive policies are what's getting in the way. Those restrictions on those progressive restrictions on your private property rights are now what threatens the progressive policies of renewables. So they're going to get you to try and utilize the private property rights that they've targeted for destruction to advocate for them. It's nuts. Yeah. Yeah. So you've got the members of a rural community accepted that property rights meant that the landowners could do whatever they wanted with their land, so long that it didn't interfere with their neighbors. The idea was, I don't want my neighbors telling me what to do, so I can't tell him what to do. I hear that all the time. If I'm solar panels on my property, I can have solar panels on my property. It's none of your frickin' business. Well, it isn't my business, and nor would I care to have it my business if it was your money, if it was your private money, and you were dealing with a private company to maybe implement something to meet market demand or to try something new to see if to test to see if there was a market for this shit, if it was going to work. And it wouldn't have anything to say, but it's public money. Even though it doesn't matter, I've been made, basically, the taxpayer doesn't mean anything anymore, but it still puts our country into debt. It still puts our country into debt that much more, which makes us that much more extortable, which also makes the dollar and money and everybody's paychecks and everybody's wallet worth that much less, and creates inflationary exponential inflation in perpetuity. This whole policy does. So yeah, I think the public has every right, if there's anything such thing as a frickin' right for anybody on anything anymore, to oppose these things. If I was going to use public money to put anything on my property, the public should have a right to, and responsibility to tell me, whoa, wait a minute, It's crazy. The idea was, I don't want my neighbor telling me what to do, so I can't tell him what to do. So they try to get you to think in terms of property rights in order to advocate for the world socialism, the Green New Deal that's targeted your property rights for destruction. It's just crazy. Stewards of the land. Farmers and ranchers are already stewards of the land, so who better to make decisions about how land is used than the owners themselves? Now all of a sudden, yeah. You see what I'm saying? Financial stability and crop diversity. In the MISO, which is the Midwestern Independent Service Operator, on one of my former videos, I showed the grid, how the grid's broken up across the nation into different sections. New York State, ISO has its own, the Northeast, the Southeast, Texas has one, California has one, the Midwest has one. I think that's what this MISO North region is. Alone, over $94 billion has been invested in clean power projects. Holy shit, right? This is what I mean. They're spending us into oblivion. Allowing farmers and landowners to harvest renewables on their own property aligns with our core American values of liberty. Really. All the world socialism that these things are implementing, just by coming to fruition. Now they want you to utilize your biases, your own biases against you. This is what applied psychology tactics of psychological manipulations utilize in getting you to implement the agendas and the doctrine that has targeted everything that you believe in for destruction. They try to get you to advocate for the doctrine and philosophy that has targeted everything that you actually believe in for destruction. It's depraved. It's depraved indifference. And they don't care. They don't give a shit. This is why I call collectivism the Great Deception. It literally sells actual slavery as liberty and actual liberty as slavery wholesale. And through the implementation of this kind of shit, we're buying it wholesale. That's what it is. Achieving community goals. Wind and solar development are another way to ensure rural communities stay rural. So, in order for you to stay rural, the state and the global public-private partnerships that have targeted our republic and our individual rights and liberty for destruction, shitting industrial solar projects and industrial wind projects all over our rural vistas and heritage is the only way that you're going to be able to maintain it. It's actually the only way you're going to be able to maintain your rural. It ensures that rural communities stay rural by having all this industrial wind and solar being shit all over it. Can you see it? Can you see the mind games? Your land, your choice. Farmers and landowners that lease their land for solar or wind developments are making a personal choice, regardless of whether the decision is based on the desire to help meet carbon reduction goals of a local community, to fulfill the renewable energy demands of utility corporate purchases and their customers, or simply to diversify their personal income stream at the expense of their countrymen, at the expense of the value of the dollar in their countrymen's paychecks and wallets and pockets. We must all have to keep our nose to the grindstone, working 2-3 jobs. In order to pay bills that are higher and higher and higher with money, a dollar that's worth less and less and less. This is the trap that we're caught in. This is the trap that we're caught in. And it's like it's the crack trap that we're caught in, because everybody's addicted to the government money now. Right? A landowner has the right to make decisions about how their land is used. Yeah. Harvesting solar and wind is beneficial to our land, our economy, our values, and our communities to ensure we keep rural America rural and yet open to the economic prosperity for decades to come. You have government money. economic prosperity of spending government money and making us poorer and poorer and poorer by sucking the value out of the money in our pockets and paychecks. To ensure we keep America rural, to keep rural America rural and yet open to economic prosperity for decades to come, property decisions must be left in the hands of the landowners. The exact opposite of what they're saying everywhere else in the doctrine. But in order to get you stupid conservatives, you stupid, traditional Americans that believe in your property rights to sign on, here. This is the bullshit that they're getting you to sign on to right here. This is it. Just telling you. But anyways, New York State has boasted about its dependence on progressive federal funds to achieve fascistic renewable energy objectives. I don't know. Let me see. See if this is, nope, that's got the wrong link. I'm sorry. But they have. That's the title. NYSERDA partners with feds to finance large-scale renewable projects. It was dated September 29th, 2023. You can probably Google that if you don't believe me. That's just what it says. Nor would I put much stock in the politics of Trump's most likely temporary flip-flop on federal level support for wind and solar, but man, is it fun to watch, right? Trump says federal government will not approve new wind and solar projects. And he says the scam of the century we will not approve wind or farmer destroying solar. The days of stupidity are over. Boy, I wish that was freaking true. But again, it's politics, politicians being political in politics, and I wouldn't put anything, I mean, you do what you want, but it's politics. I don't put much stock in anybody's politics. What I'm trying to do is try to understand the philosophies and doctrines below the forces that are causing those politics. Politics, progressive politics, right and left, they're just the waves on the surface. There's an ocean of forces beneath those waves that are causing those waves to do what they do, be it the doctrine and philosophies that are causing those political waves to do what they do, to go where they are, and to crash into things that they're crashing into and into each other. This is what I'm trying to do, is that with the liberty perspective, is to give voice to the liberty that those things have targeted for destruction. Our liberty, our republic, has no voice left in contemporary politics, nor do I see a political solution in any of this. Because the politics are, not only are they pragmatic, where everybody has to surrender at least half the truth to play the game, right? And whatever they're defending. Politics are a reflection of the people, and as a reflection of the people, it's not going to change until the people themselves change. And that's another thing. What I'm doing different than any of the other shows on Rumble, different than the social media that's being pushed out there. And I think Cooey's right. I think Dr. Jonathan Cooey at Giggle Own Biological is right. I think that we need to get off social media. I think social media is the implementation of the mind virus of collectivism. Collectivism is a mind virus. I mean, the guy Richard Dawkins, the new atheist Richard Dawkins, kind of the takeoff of what he was saying when he said religion was a mind virus, but collectivism is a mind virus, But I'm going to get into more of this Richard Dawkins. I'm going to get into more of the push back and forth and Brett Weinstein and what Richard Dawkins and Herbert Spencer and Darwinism and how genes play into the evolution, and all that is coming in my next few shows. And would it surprise you if the concept of genes that are through the Human Genome Project and the sciences have come to, science has shown what these genes are and how they affect, hereditary, inheritance, right? And how the genetics of evolution is passed down generation to generation or whatever. What if I was to tell you that the term genes was a collectivist doctrine concept long before it was proven to even exist biologically, and when they found them existing biologically, they just applied definitions to reinforce the collectivist doctrine definition of what they were, right? Be it biological Darwinism or social Darwinism, and how that evolution plays into our societies and human societies. And then they got these, what they call memes. And, memes coming into play when you consider how these memes and social media how they play long term is exactly how it was put forth in social Darwinist doctrine before social media was even here, right? But anyways, we're going to get into that. We'll check that out and see where it comes into play and how all these manipulations are coming to fruition, and this world socialist revolution is advancing and being advanced in all these innovations that are coming down the pike. I'm Joe Marshall. This is the Liberty Perspective. I hope you got something out of this series. I hope you get something out of this show. And I look forward to seeing you on the next Liberty Perspective. Thank you.